Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another SigmaLive Hangout. Today we're discussing the upcoming Turkish elections with academic Zenonas Tziarras. You're a prominent member of the Diplomatic Academy of the University of Nicosia, and the Turkish foreign policy, the Turkish system is your specialty. To many, these elections are of not significant importance because everyone considers as a given that Erdogan will be re-elected. Yet again, is not that indifferent to analysts. Why is that?
Well, it is true that many don't think that these elections are very important, but as a matter of fact, they may develop into a very important procedure, and I think that's because of how things may change very easily based on the, if you will, balance of power among the political parties in Turkey. And this has mainly to do with the pro-Kurdish party, the HDP. So the main scenario that could change things fundamentally is if the HDP manages to get into the Turkish parliament. And which would mean that the AKP would lose many of its seats, and therefore would be very difficult for the AKP to form a great majority in order to, go on, proceed with its effort to amend the constitution and turn the political system of the country into a presidential system.
But if that happens, wouldn't that mean that Turkey goes back in time and that a modern day sultanate is formed? Because then again, we have the grand majority of powers concentrated in one person, and that is the president. And that would mean that we turn our backs to what we've achieved all these years.
Yes, exactly. Erdogan's effort to amend the constitution is only the peak of years-long efforts to gain more power as himself as well as his party, and as I said before, turn the political system into a presidential system, which would mean that the president would have, as you correctly said, much more executive powers, and in turn we would see Turkey as being maybe a form of dictatorship or an autocracy, with Erdogan being the absolute leader with absolute powers, and within the framework of an ideology and a worldview that has many features coming from Turkey's Ottoman past and the political Islamic roots of the very party of the AKP.
Well, we're discussing, but I'm still not sold as to how feasible is such a scenario. Erdogan has been contested so many times these past few years. We had scandals economic-wise, we had the uprising of the people, and it doesn't seem so easy for him to achieve the grand majority of the parliament. So I think that maybe we should be discussing more as to with whom should he ally with in order to achieve, if not all of his goals, at least most of them.
Well, first of all, let me say that that Erdogan will not have a great majority is not a given. And that is because Erdogan managed, through his majoritarian approach to democracy, to polarize the society, which means that half of Turkey may be against Erdogan, but the other half of Turkey is very much pro-Erdogan. So the results, the election results, will very much depend on 3 to 5% of the vote. And this has both to do with the HDP, as I said before, as well as with the seats that the AKP will gain. But in the scenario that the HDP will gain some seats, will get into the parliament, and the AKP gets a relatively low percentage, which would mean lower than 45%, then the AKP would have to form a coalition government if it would want to proceed with the amendment of the constitution. And the most likely scenario is that the AKP will form a coalition with the nationalist MHP. Of course, this is not a certainty again, it's only a scenario because the MHP has some ideological similarities with the AKP as well as differences, of course. So we will have to see how things pan out.
On a regional level, if Erdogan does achieve a grand majority, would that have any impact on his views, on his actions, on his policies over foreign policy affairs?
Yes, it will. And to this testifies the history of the AKP and how its foreign policy developed over the past 10 years or so. We saw the AKP starting as a reformist, a moderate, conservative party, pro-EU party, pro-West party, and so on, which I would say was a framework that it created so as to appease the Kemalists on the one hand and appeal to greater portions of the society. Now, from the moment that the AKP managed to marginalize the Kemalist elites and the bureaucratic military establishment, we saw it becoming clearly more, if you will, assertive and even revisionist in its foreign policy, and that was ultimately demonstrated, apart from other cases, in the case of the Syrian civil war, which adopted a clearly revisionist strategy of regime change and pursued that with a lot of purpose. Now, if we take that into account, then we could say with almost certainty that Erdogan becoming stronger, even stronger, and gaining much more executive powers, that would mean that Turkish foreign policy would be aligned with Erdogan's vision in foreign policy and his geopolitical vision, which means more efforts to become a hegemon in the region, more efforts to control things in the region, and become, if you will, a model for other Muslim states of the region. This will bump into some opposition. It will not be easy for Erdogan to achieve this vision because other states such as Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia would oppose any such plan.
Mainly because they are revisionists as well.
Exactly, they have their own aspirations, and rightly so. I mean, for example, Egypt could rightly claim the leadership of the Arab world, whereas Turkey would never be able to do that because simply Turkey is not Arab. So if Erdogan comes out of the elections as a stronger leader, this would probably mean more polarization, not only in Turkey, but also in the region as well.
What about Turkish-European relations if Erdogan becomes the ultimate leader?
Yes, well, we've seen an indifference from Turkish part towards the EU from the middle of the last decade, and a renewed interest, if you will, in the past year. I think this is not sincere. Because if Turkey really wanted to make steps towards its accession into the EU, it could have done so, despite the stance of the EU itself. Now, apart from that, I think that Turkey with a stronger Erdogan would demonstrate even more indifference towards the EU. Although this doesn't mean that it will be willing to cut off all ties with the EU. It would rather prefer to pursue a special partnership with the EU, where Turkey will have many benefits, such as collaboration in areas of trade, economy, and importantly energy, but not have the responsibilities that come with EU membership.
The accession in the EU. Do this change in case that Erdogan needs to ally with the nationalists? Would we see significant changes to this plan, to this way of conducting foreign policy?
Yes, in some occasions, in some others not. I mean, the MHP, the Nationalist Party, has some strange views on foreign policy as well. On the one hand, is more cautious when it comes to engaging regional issues, which the AKP has been doing increasingly. On the other hand, MHP has a cautious stance when it comes to the West as well, which is similar to AKP stance. But the MHP is much more vocal in its ideas on relationships with the West. So this might impact how the AKP relationship with the West continues, and it surely would create some friction between the MHP and the AKP when it comes specifically to regional issues, and particularly Syria, Iraq, the issue of Iran, Israel, and so on.
What about the international powers? Do they really care what happens in the Turkish elections, or do they just care that Erdogan's going to be the leader of the country?
I think they do care about the elections, because they wouldn't like to see another Iran rising in the region.
Yeah.
Of course, an AKP that would win the elections wouldn't necessarily entail another Iran, because from a comparative perspective, there are two very different countries with very different political systems. But what will happen is an Erdogan that is increasingly anti-Western, increasingly harsh in his rhetoric towards Western allies, and for example Israel, and the US, the West in general, wouldn't like such a stance. They want to see Turkey as an ally in the region, that in the absence of American presence, because of the withdrawal from Iraq, because of the bad experiences of the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war and Libya, they would like to see Turkey handling their interests, anchoring for their interests. And if Turkey doesn't do that, for example, refuses to provide its military bases, its air bases for strikes against the Islamic State, for example, then this creates many problems to the West.
So ideally, let's say for the US, what would be best case scenario?
Well, the best case scenario would for the AKP to change its stance, or a government that would be more pro-Western in the likes of the Republican Party, which is not a possibility right now. It's a very distant scenario. So because of how difficult this development will be, they try to keep the AKP close. Instead of alienating Turkey because of its foreign policy stance, they try to keep it close in the hope that something will change, and that they won't drive themselves, Turkey, away and therefore against the West.
So they want a strong AKP rather than an AKP with a tail.
I would say so, yes, depending on the tail.
Well, in view that the Nationalist Party is the way to look at this point, at least.
Yes. Well, there's many complicated things, because there are many issues pertaining to the region at the moment. So we can't take a general approach or simplify things on the party's views on one issue or another. But they definitely wouldn't like an even more anti-Western government, which the MHP could potentially contribute.
Well, we'll be back Monday, maybe sometime next week, to discuss the result of the election and have up things to discuss on. This is just scenarios and hypotheses. Thank you so much for your time and your insight.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching.